In this segment, we have Karen Potter. Karen is the National Sales Director and Church and Ministry Outreach Director for Covenant Eyes. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Business and Information Systems Management from Purdue University and a Master of Arts in Education from Grand Canyon University. Karen is also a speaker, educator, blogger, and community activist committed to a new moral sexual revolution. She's also the creator of the 12-month activation plan for addressing porn in the church, a leader's guide to winning the war on pornography. Karen, thanks for being part of our summit.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Glad to have you. So we'll just dive into your story a little bit. How did you get into this area of pornography, porn culture, becoming, how did, this new moral sexual revolution, how did that become a passion area for you?
Yeah, so it takes me back. So my journey began when I was in high school. So as someone who was actually assaulted when I was in high school, I struggled with a lot of sexual brokenness from that event. So throughout my years in high school, I ended up kind of taking all of that rage and hurt and pain that I was experiencing and turned it into really self-defeating behaviors throughout high school. So I really ended up, creating a really unfortunate series of events during that very important period of time in my life. As I grew up, when I turned 18, I met my husband. We've been married now we're going on 22 years this year, but we met at that time, and he was kind of instrumental in helping to kind of lead me through that period of time and helping me to set aside some of that sexual brokenness and some of that hurt and that pain and focus on the redeeming grace of Jesus Christ. And so at 18, I got saved, and that began my journey of kind of figuring out how we live in such a broken world and how that impacted me as a youth. And then as we had children, beginning to look at the world around me and realizing that we live in a pornified culture. It is everywhere, and it's impacting our children. So then I moved into a new phase in my life after finding some grace and some healing for myself as the protector, the guardian of my children, and watching how technology began to shape their world even more than, it already was. Because at the time when I was raising our children, TV was a big influence, but internet was just coming online. So as my children went into middle school and high school and watching the different ways that technology was impacting them, I became a champion for really, raising a voice inside of the church about issues that are impacting our kids and how this sexual brokenness is not being addressed in the church. And then through that journey and through that passion, I was connected with Covenant Eyes. And so I was able to bring my talents and my expertise in the business and marketing space, as well as my background in education, over to Covenant Eyes, where I could really work hands-on with church leaders in helping them to adequately address this issue and to make space, especially for women, to talk about this issue, because we talk about how taboo it is and how it's hard for men to come forward. I think that's twofold for women. I think it's even harder for women to come forward with their own stories of sexual brokenness and the struggles that we have. Because I know for me, when I found Jesus and I went to church and I was part of that world, I could never speak of the pain and the hurt and the deep wounds that I had, because it didn't seem like a safe place to do that. So that's kind of what led me here. And that's why I'm really passionate about working with leaders and helping them find that safe space for women.
Yeah, in no small part, I've heard from Sam that in no small part, you were kind of a big reason how we got to be partners for the summit, Covenant Eyes and Living on Purpose, and myself, because you were in a meeting, I guess, about kind of a later meeting or whatever at Covenant Eyes, and the conversation was, where are we lacking? Where are we weak? And you chimed up and said, we're not doing enough for women. So I appreciate you being a champion, even in the midst of that, kind of being the first little, laying the foundation, laying the seed, planting the seed for me to come around a couple of days later and saying, hey, do you want to partner with me in this event? So it's such God's timing, obviously, and really God's intervention and his direction bringing us together in this way. But I want to just thank you specifically for your heart for women and for championing women so strongly. So thank you.
Oh, of course. We got to be in this together. This is a team effort.
Absolutely. And so on that same thread, I guess, you work a lot as the church and ministry outreach director for Covenant Eyes. You speak to a lot of pastors, you speak to a lot of church leaders often. And how much is women's issues brought up, or if at all?
Yeah, great question. So, it's not brought up nearly enough, I will say that, but we do hear, more and more ministry leaders stepping forward with, hey, I had a lady come forward and I'm not really sure what to do with her. And that's the kind of language we're hearing. And it's like, well, we've got some solutions here and we've got some great partners. Let us get you in contact with the right people and the right programs. But it's not coming up enough. And that concerns me because I think it's a twofold situation. I think, number one, I don't think there's still this weird, women don't struggle with that. It's still unknown to many ministry leaders that women are struggling with pornography. We know the statistics show a third of women are struggling with pornography. I think that number is much higher. I think that a lot of women, first off, aren't reporting it, don't consider, some of the romance novels and some of the other things that we're involved in. Pornography is in the mind as well, and it's how we interact with those things. But first off, they're not coming forward, and they're not saying anything. So ministry leaders don't think it's as big of a problem. And then the second thing is that when they come out and they have questions, they really don't know what to do for women. There is just a real lack of knowledge of how to support women in this area because for so long it's been taboo for men, but for women, we're not even scratching the surface. So that's definitely a concern that I see is that first off, it's not being brought up nearly enough, especially when there's so many struggling.
We had a conversation earlier this week with Jessica Harris talking about the fact that, I think some of the misconceptions right now is that you're talking about church leadership, talking about elders and their wives, let's say. Maybe their wives aren't struggling with pornography, so it's not something that they're seeing as an issue that's overarching. Because it's not our grandmothers that are struggling as much or are as mothers who are struggling as much as it is millennials right now who are struggling and Gen Z who are struggling right now. And so when you're talking about church leadership, they need to broaden their scope of asking what are the greater issues facing the church right now, because it is going to be the next generation of church leadership, of church staff, of church leaders or volunteers who are going to be the ones who are struggling. And so can you speak to that a little bit about Gen Z, about millennials, and what you're seeing as far as the increase of pornography use in the church?
Absolutely. So there is a ray of hope. I will say that in the big scheme of things, from the church's perspective, the one audience that we see actually coming to us in droves asking for help in addressing the female struggler with pornography, it's actually the youth ministry leaders. And so the beauty of that is that youth ministry leaders are seeing young girls who are not afraid to talk about this issue, who are saying, look, my culture, everything I'm doing, Instagram, Snapchat, everything is bombarded with this pornified culture, and I'm struggling. So that's a positive thing. But the bigger thing is, while we see that in youth ministry, the trickling up to other ministry channels is not happening. And so when we're talking about Gen Z and the millennial generation, obviously these generations were the first fully, technologically advanced students online. The millennials actually were involved in technology from middle school and beyond. And then Gen Z is pretty much cradle to grave for them. They are going to have technology as part of their life every minute. Now, as a mom with two who are Gen Z, so they're both in college right now, knowing how connected they are to their technology and seeing the impact of, pornography is available on Instagram. It's on Snapchat. Sexting is the new dating in high school. So these impacts on the culture of these kids, to them, pornography is an everyday norm. So, talking about pornography is actually much easier with these young people. So if ministry leaders would take the initiative and start having these conversations, these young people are actually more willing to talk about this topic because it's part of their culture. When you're talking to a boomer or, I'm a Gen Xer, we're a little more standoffish. It's a little bit more taboo for us because we've always kind of pushed it under the rug. You don't talk about sex at church. But these younger generations, they want to talk about it. They want to talk about these issues because they're starting to see the repercussions of living in this pornified culture on their day-to-day lives. And so I think we have a real opportunity here as church leaders to get engaged with these younger generations because they're willing to talk about this and to take action steps on that.
Absolutely. So what are some tangible first steps that a church leader, a pastor or church ministry leader within the church can begin to do to begin to just open up a dialogue on these issues?
Yeah. So
especially for women.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The first step, I think, always is education. Like, you've got to understand the problem. You've got to understand how big the problem is. And you got to do a little research on, ways that you can support the different ministry channels, specifically women. So as leaders, the first step we tell every church leader that comes to us is, let's get you kind of on a level playing ground. Let's get you and your staff educated and empowered so that when you are out in the field and you're able to help women or men that are struggling with pornography, you have a baseline knowledge, you have some foundational experience so that you can direct them to the right resources. So the first step is always education. After that, a lot of staff and ministry leaders are struggling with these same issues themselves, whether it's women or men. And so, it's even dealing with our own issues and looking into our past and looking at some of the root issues that may be driving us to unwanted sexual behavior and addressing some of those things as staff members. And then from there, we can begin to reach out to the congregation. But the first step is always education. You've got to know a little bit about the topic you're talking about. And one of our business courses that we take or that we did back in college was actually, it teaches you to be at least 2 chapters ahead of the rest, right? So it's really important that pastors and ministry leaders, you've got to know at least 2 chapters more than the people that are struggling with pornography on how to get out of it. You don't have to be the expert. You don't have to have it all together yourself, but you've got to be a little bit ahead of them so that you can help them and guide them and lead them forward.
And this might be a little bit of a touchy subject, but we're not afraid of those here. Let's talk about women in the church, right? Women's role in the church. How do women get mobilized in fighting the porn culture within the church, but then within the 4 walls of the church, but also outside the 4 walls of the church?
All right. So for women in the church, the first step that we really need to take is we need to stop being silent, because whether it's, whether you're struggling with pornography or you have sexual brokenness in your past, maybe you have a history of your own, it doesn't matter, but we all have a story to tell, and we need to stop acting like, everything's fine and putting on the Sunday face and not, addressing these issues. And then we need to stop shooting the wounded, because that's another thing. Women really need to take a step forward on that, because I know that when I was, an early Christian and I was learning all about grace and forgiveness and mercy, the one thing that frustrated me was that I didn't have anyone in the church that was safe to talk to, because I felt like there was a lot of judgment. And some of it was me just in, not being aware that people were, open and responsive, but I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know if there was anyone that was willing to listen and to relate to that. So as women, we need to stop judging one another. We need to, be there for one another. And we need to create some accountability groups where those of us that are struggling or having issues or overcoming, we need to have a way to connect with other women that share that experience, because statistically, we're not alone, and we need to stop pretending that we are. And it's okay to not have it all together. Like, we need to tell each other that it's okay. And I think that would be the first step. Women have just got to step up to the plate. We've got to stop shooting the wounded, come together, sister to sister, and really stand united on this. And then once we can come together, we can start to take a deeper stand against the culture in general, because how do we fight the culture when we can't even talk about this openly in the church? Like, you can't go out and defeat the pornography culture outside of the church walls if you're not willing to start with yourself and with your own community. And the church has got to be the place where that starts.
So let's also talk about this 12-month activation plan. We have a lot of church leaders who are watching right now, pastors, church leaders. Can you talk a little bit about what that activation plan looks like and maybe how they can get more information about it?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that we found extremely useful in working with church leaders is giving them a step-by-step plan to run throughout the course of a year. So in working with different churches, we realized that Covenant Eyes has a lot of amazing resources, and partners all have amazing resources, but the implementation of great things was not so good for the church. So what we wanted to do is break it down for our ministry leaders who are busy, who pornography is not the only thing on their plate. We understand that. we wanted to give them a step-by-step guide of things that they can be doing every single month of the year throughout a 12-month cycle to make sure that pornography is talked about in the church, and that sexual brokenness and biblical sexuality and all these different terms are brought up throughout the year, because we have to remember that what we talk about and what we spend time on is what people think is valuable. So if you only talk about pornography once every 5 years, your people are going to move on to the next topic. But if you are talking about it on an ongoing and regular, consistent basis, it's going to start to resonate. It's marketing 101 here. I know that sounds terrible, but I mean, let's look at, there's a reason why our kids are exposed to commercials during cartoon time on Saturday mornings, and it's the same commercials week in and week out because they want them to buy the cereal. They want them to buy the toys. We need to have that same approach with talking about this tough topic, because the more we talk about it, the more people are comfortable with it. The more they're comfortable with it, the more they're going to come forward. So the 12-month plan, if you're interested in getting your hands on that, you can actually reach out to Covenant Eyes, and we will help you put your own plan together for your church with your leadership team. And you can do that by emailing us at communities@covenanteyes.com. And we will put you in contact with one of our church consultants who will put something together for you and your leadership team so that you can begin that journey.
That's really helpful. Thank you. We're linking to Covenant Eyes throughout the summit, obviously, as an awesome partner in this fight and in this summit. So any link that says Covenant Eyes, it'll be a hyperlink link to Covenant Eyes. So go to the website, check out the resources as well, because we definitely want to recommend those. And is there anything else that you feel like the church leader, the woman in the church, needs to hear today to be mobilized in a greater capacity?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that they just have to remember they're not alone. And I'm sure that that's been said over and over again throughout this summit, but it's really important that we understand as women that no matter where you are on the journey, we're all in this together. And most of us come to the table with a little baggage. And you know what? A little baggage is okay. It shows that we've lived and we've had experiences, and those experiences can in turn help somebody else. Because like the Bible teaches us, you need a Paul, you need a Barnabas, and you need a Timothy. So we need to, as women, move into the role of, a Paul for the next generation, because the Gen Z and the millennials, the Gen Y below us, especially for me as a Gen Xer or for the baby boomers, we've got to be there for that generation, because what they're dealing with is something unprecedented. We had never experienced anything like that. In our day, pornography was magazines, maybe some, HBO, but what our children are experiencing is just unprecedented. So we've got to gear up. We've got to, if men aren't willing to step up to the plate, we have to. It's our turn to just step up and own this conversation and help set some women free and be there for that next generation. So that would be my wisdom and advice for today, is just don't be afraid, get women together, and let's fight this battle.
Amen. Karen, thank you so much for being a part of our summit and for sharing. These are really tangible, practical ways that the church and women within the church can really take ownership and create a better future for all. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Crystal.